Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The Queen of the Crows. Scary story, published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Introduction. Graveyard was Morwen's sanctuary, not from the dead, but from the living. Huddled beneath the skeletal embrace of a weeping willow, she clutched her worn copy of Baudelaire, its palms mirroring the inky despair that clung to her like a shroud. A flurry of black wings descended, their cawing a symphony only she could comprehend. Morwen, the girl with eyes like polished obsidian and hair that shimmered like a raven's wing, raised her gaze to meet the swirling vortex of crows. They were a part of her, a constant, unsettling presence, a secret she couldn't outrun. Tonight, however, their cawing held a new urgency, a message woven into the wind, a harbinger of the darkness that threatened to consume not just her, but the entire town. Chapter 1. Murmuration of Midnight. The headstones, weathered and gray, loomed like silent sentinels against the bruised purple twilight. A shroud of mist hung heavy in the air, clinging to Morwen's skin like a clammy hand. She pulled her worn leather jacket tighter, the cemetery's chill seeping through despite the barrier. Here, amidst the slumbering dead, she found a semblance of peace, a refuge from the whispering stares and muttered speculations that followed her through the bustling streets of Gloomhaven. Tonight, however, the usual tranquility was shattered. A cacophony of cawing erupted from the skeletal branches of the ancient oak that marked the cemetery's entrance. Hundreds of crows, their inky forms blotting out the last slivers of dying light, descended upon Morwen. They circled her in a mesmerizing dance, their obsidian eyes reflecting the dying embers of the day. Cawing wasn't their usual guttural chorus. It was a frantic symphony, laced with an unsettling urgency. Morwen, despite the chill that snaked down her spine, felt a strange sense of comfort in their presence. They were constant, a secret language only she understood. Yet, tonight, their agitation mirrored a disquiet that had been brewing within her for weeks. It was a feeling of something impending, a darkness stirring on the periphery of her vision. She closed her eyes, inhaling the damp, earthy scent of the graveyard. Usually, the silence soothed her, but tonight, it hummed with an unseen energy. A prickling sensation crawled up her arms, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. Images, fragmented and unsettling, flashed behind her eyelids, a gaping maw lined with razor-sharp teeth, a swirling vortex of inky blackness, a blood-curdling scream that echoed in the emptiness. Morwen gasped, the vision dissolving as quickly as it came. Disoriented, she stumbled back, a hand brushing against the rough surface of a headstone. The inscription, worn near illegibility, mocked her with its promise of eternal rest. Cruel joke, she thought, considering the turmoil that gnawed at her. As if sensing her distress, the crows descended further, their agitated cawing filling the air. One, larger than the others, its feathers gleaming with an unnatural sheen, detached itself from the swirling mass and landed on the headstone beside her. Its gaze, intelligent and ancient, seemed to bore into her very soul. A voice, raspy and layered with the whispers of 1,000 winds, echoed in her mind. It wasn't a voice she could hear with her ears, but rather a presence, a feeling. "Beware, child of the crows," it rasped, the words laced with urgency. "The veil weakens. The shadows stir." Morwen's breath hitched. This wasn't the first time she'd received such cryptic messages, but tonight, the fear was sharper, the feeling of impending doom more potent. Before she could question further, the crow launched itself back into the swirling vortex, its cause fading into the distance as the flock dispersed as quickly as it had arrived. Morwen stood alone in the deepening twilight, the unsettling encounter leaving a cold dread in its wake. Gloomhaven, a town shrouded in perpetual mist and whispered secrets, suddenly felt like a pressure cooker about to burst. The darkness she'd always sensed, lurking at its edges, seemed to be pressing closer, and a shiver, deeper than the chill of the night, ran down her spine. Morwen knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Gloom. The walk back to her small apartment on Elm Street was a blur. The encounter in the cemetery played on repeat in Morwen's mind, the crow's cryptic warning a weight in her gut. Back in the sterile confines of her room, the cacophony of the crows still echoed in her ears, transforming into a throbbing headache behind her eyes. It wasn't the first time they'd driven her to the verge of a migraine, their frantic cawing often carrying with it fragments of unsettling visions. These glimpses of darkness, though fleeting, left her feeling raw and exposed. The next morning, the oppressive feeling lingered. Exhaustion clung to her like a shroud, and the crows seemed omnipresent. They followed her to the dingy diner where she grabbed a lukewarm coffee, their watchful eyes making her feel like a fly trapped in a spider's web. They perched on lampposts, on garbage cans, their unsettling presence a constant reminder of the darkness stirring within her. Seeking refuge from the relentless crows and the turmoil in her head, Morwen escaped to the town's only library, a haven of dusty tomes and forgotten lore. As she wandered the labyrinthine stacks, searching for a distraction, a voice broke the silence. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Startled, Morwen turned to see a young man standing beside her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he examined a book with a cracked leather cover. He had an endearingly awkward air, his glasses slightly askew and a mop of unruly brown hair. Morwen recognized him, Jasper, the quiet kid from her English class, a known bookworm with a passion for history. "The myths and legends section?" Morwen asked, a hint of suspicion lingering in her voice. Jasper gave her a sheepish grin. "Guilty as charged. I can't resist a good mystery, especially one shrouded in dust and forgotten by most." He glanced at the crows perched on the windowsill outside, their beady eyes fixed on Morwen. "They seem rather fond of you." A flicker of curiosity crossed his expression. Morwen felt a pang of annoyance. The crows weren't pets, they were. She wasn't sure what they were. A burden, perhaps? "They follow me everywhere," she mumbled, hoping to dissuade his interest. "Interesting," Jasper mused, tapping his chin with the book's worn spine. "Crows are often seen as harbingers of bad omens, you know. Messengers from the other side." He tilted his head, his gaze lingering on her. "Perhaps they have a message for you." Morwen felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Jasper's words echoed the crow's cryptic warning. Ignoring the unease twisting in her gut, she shrugged. "Probably just looking for scraps. Crows are scavengers, after all." Jasper didn't look convinced, but he didn't push the topic further. Instead, he began discussing a local legend he'd stumbled upon, a tale of a pact made with crows generations ago. A pact that promised protection in exchange for something more sinister. As he spoke, Morwen felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. These weren't just stories, they were whispers from the past. Whispers that resonated with the unease gnawing at her soul. Later that evening, walking back from the library, Morwen witnessed a chilling scene that confirmed her growing fear. Mrs. Henderson, a frail woman who lived across the street, was screaming in her front yard. Her eyes were wide with terror, her nightgown clinging to her trembling form. As Morwen approached, she saw the source of the commotion, a mangled sheep carcass, its lifeless eyes staring vacantly back at the starless sky. A wave of nausea washed over Morwen. It wasn't the first time livestock had gone missing or been found torn to shreds. But this time, The feeling of impending doom was undeniable. The darkness was closer, its tendrils reaching into the once peaceful town of Gloomhaven, and Morwen, with the weight of the crow's message and the whispers of the past pressing upon her, knew she was somehow inextricably linked to it. Chapter 3: Shadows from the Past. The image of Mrs. Henderson's terrorized face and the gruesome sight of the sheep carcass haunted Morwen's sleep. Nightmares, vivid and unsettling, plagued her. In them, she found herself standing at the precipice of a bottomless chasm, swirling with an inky blackness that pulsed with a malevolent energy. From its depths emerged monstrous creatures with razor-sharp claws and eyes that burned like embers. They reached for her, their guttural screeches filling her ears. Morwen woke with a gasp, sweat clinging to her skin, the sheets twisted around her like grasping tendrils. The taste of fear lingered on her tongue, a metallic tang that mirrored the dread festering in her gut. The encounter with Jasper and the chilling scene outside Mrs. Henderson's house had solidified a suspicion that had been brewing for weeks. The darkness she'd always felt lurking at the edges of Gloomhaven was no longer content with the shadows. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Morwen sought out Jasper the next day. She found him hunched over a dusty tome in the library's restricted archives, a determined glint in his eyes. "You won't believe what I found," he said excitedly, motioning for her to join him. He pointed to faded script and faded illustrations, depicting cloaked figures with long, dark hair and crows perched on their shoulders. "Grow witches," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Morwen's breath hitched. The term sent a tremor through her, a half-forgotten memory flickering at the edges of her mind. As Jasper delved deeper, piecing together fragments of history lost to time, a chilling truth emerged. Generations ago, Gloomhaven had been plagued by a similar darkness, a malevolent entity that threatened to consume the town. It was the Crow Witches, Jasper explained, who had made a pact with this entity, offering something of theirs in exchange for the town's protection. The details of the pact were shrouded in mystery, but the consequences were clear. The darkness was kept at bay, but a tether remained, a vulnerability that could be exploited if the pact was broken. Morwen felt a cold, dread pool in her stomach. The fragmented memories, the unsettling visions, the crows, they all made a horrifying kind of sense now. That night, as Morwen lay in bed, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the moon, the crow's voice echoed in her mind once more. This time, it wasn't just a warning, but a fragmented memory, a glimpse into her own past. She saw a young girl, strikingly similar to herself, kneeling before a swirling vortex of crows, chanting in an unknown language. The memory shifted, and she found herself facing the very same entity from her nightmares, a monstrous serpent with eyes like burning embers. A sense of terror and a primal urge to protect washed over her. Then, darkness. Morwen woke with a jolt, the memory as vivid as a dream. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was a forgotten truth. She was descended from the Crow Witches, and the crows were not just harbingers. They were guardians, bound to her by a pact made generations ago. The weight of this revelation settled on her like a leaden cloak. She wasn't just an outsider. She was inextricably linked to the darkness that threatened to engulf Gloomhaven. And as she looked out the window at the swirling vortex of crows circling beneath a bruised moon, Morwen knew the time for hiding was over. Chapter 4: The Pact Unveiled. The unsettling knowledge sat heavy in Morwen's gut. The fragmented memories, the crow's cryptic messages, it all pointed to a horrifying truth. She was the last descendant of the Crow Witches, bound by a pact that held back an unspeakable darkness. Sleep offered no escape. The chilling vision of the monstrous serpent continued to plague her dreams. The next morning, Morwen found Jasper waiting for her outside her apartment building. His usually amiable face was etched with concern. "Morwen," he began hesitantly, "about yesterday, the crows, the nightmares. I saw your reaction to my research on the crow witches. There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Morwen hesitated. Could she trust Jasper with this burden? But the isolation was suffocating. Perhaps, with his help, they could decipher the chilling truth behind the pact and find a way to contain the darkness before it consumed everything. Taking a deep breath, she blurted out the fragmented memories, the crow's messages, and the horrifying truth about her lineage. Jasper listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the air. "So, you're telling me you're some kind of crow witch?" he finally asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Morwen nodded, feeling a surge of both vulnerability and defiance. "I don't know what else to call it." "And these crows," Jasper continued, gesturing towards the swirling vortex circling above them, "they're connected to the pact?" "I believe so," Morwen admitted. "They're guardians, bound to protect the town." Jasper's eyes gleamed with a newfound determination. "Then, maybe the library holds the key. Maybe there's something else about the pact, a way to strengthen it." Or his voice trailed off, a flicker of fear crossing his features. They raced back to the library, a shared sense of urgency fueling their steps. Hours blurred as they scoured the dusty archives, poring over ancient texts and faded maps. Finally, nestled within a crumbling tome, they found it a hidden inscription etched in a language eerily similar to the one whispered by the crows in Morwen's nightmares. Working together, with Morwen piecing together the language fragments and Jasper deciphering the historical context, they unraveled the chilling details of the pact. It confirmed Morwen's fears. The crow witches had offered a portion of their own life force to bind the entity, creating a tenuous tether between their world and the abyss. The inscription also revealed a horrifying consequence. Of breaking the pact, the entity wouldn't simply return. It would be unleashed with a vengeance, its power amplified by the broken oath. Morwen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The weight of this responsibility, of potentially unleashing an unspeakable horror on the town, was almost unbearable. An insidious doubt crept into her mind. Could she, a girl haunted by unsettling visions and burdened by a darkness of her own, truly be the protector Gloomhaven needed? As the realization settled in, another feeling arose of fierce determination. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. The town, her home, was at stake. She wouldn't let the darkness win, not if she had anything to say about it. Glancing at Jasper, his eyes filled with a mixture of trepidation and unwavering support, Morwen knew she wasn't alone. Together, they had to find a way to confront this darkness, not just for the town, but for her own sense of self. The battle lines were drawn, and Morwen, the reluctant heir of the Crow Witches, was about to step into her destiny. Chapter 5. Embracing the Crows. The weight of the pact hung heavy on Morwen's shoulders. Fear gnawed at her, a cold serpent coiling around her heart. Yet, a flicker of defiance burned within her. She wouldn't succumb to the darkness, not without a fight. Jasper, his brow furrowed in concern, squeezed her hand. "We'll figure this out, Morwen." Together, his unwavering support was a lifeline in the storm of emotions brewing within her. They needed a plan, and more importantly, they needed help. The inscription mentioned nothing about breaking the pact, only the dire consequences. But perhaps there was another way. Perhaps the key to strengthening the tether or communing with the entity lay with the crows, the guardians bound to the pact. Morwen knew where to start. Deep within the Gloomhaven forest, shrouded in an ancient veil of silence, lay a gnarled oak, its branches reaching towards the inky sky like skeletal fingers. Legends whispered of a wise elder crow who resided there, a leader of the flock, said to possess knowledge passed down through generations. He was the one Morwen sought Eldred. The forest floor crunched under her boots as she ventured deeper, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. An unsettling feeling prickled at her skin, a sense of being watched. But it wasn't a malevolent presence, it felt curious. As she neared the ancient oak, a single crow emerged from the canopy, its obsidian eyes fixed on her. This wasn't one of the crows from the swirling vortex that followed her. This one was older, larger, its feathers gleaming with an unnatural sheen. A sense of reverence washed over Morwen. This was Eldred. The crow cawed a single, guttural sound, a sound that resonated deep within her bones. Images flashed across her mind, swirling darkness, the monstrous serpent, the chanting figures of the crow witches. Then, silence. Suddenly, a voice filled her head. Not a spoken word, but a feeling, a presence. It was Eldred, his voice ancient and raspy, yet laced with a surprising warmth. "You seek answers, child of the crows?" Morwen didn't speak, but the desperation in her heart echoed in the silence. She felt Eldred's understanding, a flicker of empathy amidst the ancient wisdom. The crow cawed again, the sound sharp and demanding. Then, with a powerful beat of its wings, it launched itself back into the canopy. Morwen followed, her heart pounding in her chest. A series of trials awaited her. Eldred had made that clear. Trials to test her courage, her connection to the crows, and perhaps most importantly, her ability to control the raw power that simmered within her. She emerged into a hidden clearing, bathed in an ethereal moonlight filtering through the dense foliage. A dozen crows perched on gnarled branches, their beady eyes watching her intently. Eldred landed on a low branch in front of her. "The pact is a delicate balance, child," Eldred's voice echoed in her mind. "You must learn the language of the crows, the tongue of the pact. Only then can you understand your role, your power." The next few hours were a blur of intense concentration. Eldred, through a series of caws and intricate movements, taught Morwen the ancient language, a language that resonated with a primal power within her. Slowly, she began to understand the crows, their complex caws carrying meaning and emotions. Finally, the test arrived. Eldred pointed with his beak towards a distant branch upon which hung a glowing red amulet. "Retrieve it," his voice commanded. Morwen closed her eyes, focusing on the crows. She spoke the commands in the ancient tongue, her voice hesitant at first, then gaining strength with each syllable. The crows responded, their caws forming a complex symphony. They swooped down, a dark, swirling vortex of feathers and intelligence. With a coordinated effort, they lifted the amulet, maneuvering it through the branches with an almost preternatural precision. Finally, they placed it gently at Morwen's feet. Morwen stared at the amulet, a surge of power coursing through her veins. It felt intoxicating, like a forbidden fruit, tempting her with its forbidden power. Yet, amidst the exhilaration, a seed of doubt lingered. This power was raw, volatile, and she could sense the darkness lurking within its core. Eldred cawed once, a single sharp sound that snapped her out of her reverie. "Power is a double-edged sword, child. Use it wisely." The weight of his words settled heavily on her. Morwen knew this was just the beginning. She had awoken a power within herself, a power that could save Gloomhaven or consume her. Chapter 6. The darkness breaches. Morwen emerged from the forest a changed woman. The trials with Eldred had unlocked a power within her, a connection to the crows that hummed beneath her skin. Yet, along with this newfound ability, came a chilling awareness. The darkness she was meant to hold, at bay, mirrored the raw power surging through her veins. It was a constant presence, a whisper at the edges of her consciousness, promising strength at the cost of her humanity. Returning to Gloomhaven, she found the town shrouded in a thicker, more oppressive mist than usual. An unsettling quiet hung in the air, broken only by the frantic cawing of the crows circling overhead. The feeling of unease that had simmered for weeks had transformed into a gnawing dread. Jasper, his face etched with worry, met her at the library. "Morwen," he blurted out, his voice shaking. "There's been another disappearance. Mr. Davis, from Elm Street. He vanished last night." Morwen's heart sank. This wasn't a random event. It was a sign the darkness, sensing a potential breach in the pact, was pushing its boundaries. Panic threatened to consume her, but she pushed it down. Fear wouldn't help them. "We need to find him," Morwen said, her voice surprisingly steady. The crows might have seen something. Together, they ventured outside. Crows, their once monotonous cawing now urgent, swarmed around them. Morwen spoke to them in the ancient language, her voice laced with desperation. The response was a chaotic symphony of caws and frantic movements. They directed her towards the abandoned mine shaft on the outskirts of town, a place whispered to be haunted and best avoided. The oppressive silence of the mine shaft, broken only by the dripping of water and the frantic beating of Morwen's heart, intensified the dread gnawing at her. Deeper, they ventured, the air thick with dust and the weight of forgotten tragedies. Then, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the tunnels. Morwen and Jasper exchanged a terrified glance. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but a surge of determination, fueled by the image of Mr. Davis in danger, pushed her forward. They stumbled upon a cavern, its floor littered with bones, the grim remnants of previous victims. In the center, bathed in an eerie green glow emanating from cracks in the ceiling, stood a hulking figure, a twisted parody of a human, its eyes glowing like embers, its claws dripping with a viscous black liquid. Mr. Davis lay unconscious at its feet. The entity, a primal fear, threatened to consume Morwen. It was bigger, more monstrous than she could have ever imagined. But amidst the terror, a flicker of something else arose, a reflection of the entity's darkness, a cold, calculating echo within her own being. It whispered promises of power, of strength enough to obliterate this creature. But Morwen knew the cost. If she succumbed to this darkness, she would become the very monster she was meant to defeat. With a deep breath, she forced the darkness back, focusing instead on the frantic cawing of the crows circling above. This was her test, not just of power, but of control. The fate of Mr. Davis, and perhaps the town itself, rested on her shoulders. Chapter 7: Desperate Measures. Morwen locked eyes with the monstrous entity, its malevolent presence radiating a suffocating dread. Crows cawed furiously, circling above them in a chaotic dance. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with anticipation. This was the moment of truth, the battle line drawn. With a guttural roar, the entity lunged, its claws aimed at the unconscious Mr. Davis. Adrenaline surged through Morwen. Ignoring the chilling whisper urging her to unleash her own darkness, she focused on the crows. In the ancient tongue, she issued a series of commands, her voice ringing with newfound authority. The crows responded with a coordinated flurry of attacks. They swooped down, pecking at the entity's glowing eyes, tearing at its leathery hide. The creature shrieked in rage, momentarily distracted, allowing Morwen and Jasper to drag Mr. Davis to safety. They stumbled back towards the entrance of the mine shaft, the crows continuing their valiant assault. Behind them, the monstrous entity thrashed, its rage echoing through the tunnels. They emerged into the daylight, gasping for breath, only to be met with a horrifying sight. Gloomhaven was no longer the sleepy town they knew. The oppressive mist had morphed into a swirling vortex of darkness, tendrils reaching out like grasping claws. Shrieks and screams filled the air as the entity's influence bled into the town, twisting and warping reality itself. Panic threatened to consume Morwen, but seeing the terror in Jasper's eyes fueled her resolve. They couldn't let the darkness win. But how? The crows, despite their bravery, were no match for the sheer power of the entity. Exhausted and desperate, they raced back to the library, hoping to find answers in the dusty tomes. Hours blurred as they scoured the pages, their search frantic. Finally, in a hidden inscription, almost lost amongst faded diagrams, they found it a cryptic passage hinting at renegotiating the pact. But it came at a terrible cost, a sacrifice of great value, a piece of themselves. Morwen stared at the inscription, a cold dread settling in her stomach. A sacrifice. What did that even mean? As she pondered the chilling words, a voice, raspy and ancient, echoed in her mind, Eldred. Pact can be renegotiated, child, the crow leader's voice rasped. It demands a piece of your soul, a tether to bind the entity anew. Morwen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. A piece of her soul. Was she even capable of such a sacrifice? Yet, as she looked out the window at the ravaged town, the screams echoing in her ears, she knew there was no other option. Suddenly, Jasper, his face pale but resolute, spoke. Morwen, there might be another way. Maybe the sacrifice doesn't have to be yours. He took a deep breath, his voice wavering slightly. The inscription mentions a piece of yourself, but what if it doesn't have to be your soul? A flicker of hope, tinged with a chilling premonition, sparked in Morwen's eyes. Jasper's plan, though desperate, might be their only chance. But what was he suggesting? And what would the cost of his alternative be? Chapter 8. Queen of the Crows. Morwen stared at Jasper, his words hanging heavy in the air. A piece of yourself, he had said, the unspoken implication a sharp blow to her gut. Did he truly believe he could offer himself, become a tether to the abyss in her place? The guilt was a leaden weight in her chest, but the desperate hope in his eyes held her gaze. Eldred's voice echoed once more in her mind. The choice is yours, child. The pact can be a prison or a shield. Choose wisely. Morwen closed her eyes, the cacophony of the ravaged town and the frantic cawing of the crows fading into the background. She felt the pull of her own darkness, whispering promises of strength, of becoming like the entity itself, a ruler rather than a prisoner. But another voice, quieter but stronger, spoke within her, the voice of responsibility, of protecting the town she called home. With a resolute breath, she pushed the darkness back. No, she wouldn't succumb. She would find her own way. Suddenly, the answer materialized, clear and chilling. The pact demanded a piece of herself, a tether to the entity. But what if that tether wasn't a fragment of her soul, but a symbol of her newfound power, a bond forged in defiance? Morwen focused her will, directing the crows in the ancient tongue. They responded with a surge of energy, swirling into a tight formation above them. As she poured her power into the crows, a transformation began. Their black feathers shimmered, taking on a metallic sheen that gleamed under the fractured sunlight. The crows grew larger, their eyes burning with an unnatural white light. Emerging from the swirling vortex of crows, Morwen stood transformed. Gone was the unassuming librarian. In her place stood a figure cloaked in darkness, her eyes glowing with the same white light as the crows. This was the Queen of the Crows, a manifestation of her power and her burden. She raised her hand, and the transformed crows surged forward, a living storm aimed at the monstrous entity that ravaged Gloomhaven. The battle raged, a collision of darkness against darkness. The entity shrieked in fury, its tendrils of inky shadow lashing out, but the crows, imbued with Morwen's power, held firm. Jasper, ever resourceful, had snuck into the library earlier and taken the town's most valuable artifact, an ancient amulet rumored to contain a sliver of pure light. As Morwen and the crows distracted the entity, Jasper, his face etched with determination, hurled the amulet towards the creature's heart. A blinding light erupted, forcing Morwen to shield her eyes. When the light subsided, the monstrosity was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness that pulsed with a faint, unsettling hum. The pact was not broken, but it was reforged, a new tether anchored by the symbol of the Queen of the Crows. Gloomhaven was scarred, the battle leaving a chilling legacy. Homes lay in ruins, the townsfolk shaken but alive. Morwen, drained but resolute, stood amidst the wreckage. The crows, their unnatural glow now faded, perched on her shoulders, a constant reminder of her choice. She was no longer Morwen, the quiet librarian. She was the Queen of the Crows, forever bound to this pact, forever teetering on the edge of the abyss. Yet, as she looked out at the ravaged town, a flicker of hope remained. Perhaps, by embracing her destiny, she could learn to wield her power not just as a weapon, but as a shield, protecting Gloomhaven from the darkness that forever lurked at its borders.